Well, welcome everybody. For those who don't know, we've got a few new members here today. My name is Bill Barnes. I'm the captain of this illustrious group. Well, it's wonderful to see you all. We have some, as I mentioned, some new members joining today. I'd like to introduce Richard Bott from Sydney, Simon Smith from Dungog, New South Wales, and Robert Sharpman from Chicago, USA. So welcome to your first Sydney Passengers meeting.
Hi.
Great to see you.
Oh, that's great, because I'm looking to be in Chicago later in April, May next year.
Well, please come and visit, and I'll give you the Cook's tour.
Well, that would be wonderful. Just
And
make
that's
sure.
That's not a casual statement. I love to do it. I have some friends in Sydney who will vouch for my my tourist.
Hi, Richard. Good to see you.
Excellent. Just make sure the weather's not freezing.
Can't guarantee that.
I've heard about Chicago.
It'll be nice though. It'll be nice. It's spring.
I'm sure it will. Yeah, nice time of year.
It's always good to see Alice and Marquetta from the Czech Republic, of course, very early in the morning. Alice, thank you very much for joining us. It's wonderful. You can do it.
That's great.
Right, a bit of news. Our industrials editor, Erin O'Neill, she planned to have a week off work this week, and amongst other things, week off work this month, I'm trying to should be saying. And amongst other things, she was going to start compiling the next issue of the Passengers Law. So that's great. We can get that coming to you sometime in December. And I'd like to give congratulations also to the weekly winners of our trivia quiz that we ran through our Facebook group in August and September. So congratulations to the 6 weekly winners of that trivia quiz. Our guest speaker today is Passenger Keith Suter, who will be talking about Afghanistan, the Great Game. Why was Afghanistan so important to the British Empire? If you don't know Keith personally, you may recognise his name as the author of some excellent articles in the log, particularly about Holmes' travels during the Great Hiatus after the Reichenbach Falls incident. Keith also won our annual Montpellier Award last year for one of those articles. I'm personally very much looking forward to Keith's talk today. We are recording this meeting, and after suitable editing, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. We're letting everybody know when it's available to view there, but if you don't want to be in this video, please let me know, or Doug will try and edit you out. Put a big cross across your face, maybe, something like that. If you don't want to be recorded, let me know, and we'll try and scrub you out. A little bit of media news. As far as we're aware, Netflix is still working on the second Enola Holmes film. There have been reports of filming in the UK in September and October. Henry Cavill again stars as Sherlock Holmes, and Helena Bonham Carter as their mother, Eudoria. Rumours are that it's most likely based on the second book in the Nancy Springer series called The Case of the Left-Handed Lady. But there's been obviously no hints of a release date yet. The most recent news about a possible BBC Sherlock Series 5 is that any of the principals who are interviewed about it say they haven't ruled it out. That's about as close as we're going to get for the time being, I think, to any news about a new Sherlock series from the BBC. Similarly, there's no news on a new Robert Downey Jr. Jude Law movie, the third in their series. That project has got a working title of Sherlock Holmes 3. But everybody, all the media reports to say it's still on the back burner. To use a common quote that appears in the media about that particular project. Netflix also seems to still be working on a new young adult movie called Sherlock Jr. This one's set in modern day USA, where young John Watson teams up with his neighbour, young Sherlock Holmes, to solve some mysteries and a witch's curse on their town. So keep an eye out for that one. As is customary at our passengers meetings, we'll always look at some anniversaries that occurred in the canon around this time and other notable events in the Sherlockian world. So on the 6th of November 1855, the ship Gloria Scott was destroyed at sea, and the survivors from that vessel were picked up by the brig Hotspur and taken to Sydney. They are the original Sydney passengers from where we take our name. On the 13th of November 1920, Arthur Conan Doyle arrived in Sydney on his spiritualism tour. So almost 101 years ago today, Arthur Conan Doyle was in Sydney, spruiking about the spiritualist world. On the 19th of November, according to Dr. Watson, and no year given, the adventure of the Sussex vampire commenced. On the 22nd of November, 1887, Beaton's Christmas Annual, containing the first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, was published. On the third week of November, 1895, again, according to Dr. Watson, the adventure of the Bruce Partington plans took place. And in late November 1894, the adventure of the Golden Pince-Nez happened. And in November some year, the adventure of the Dying Detective occurred. So they are the appropriate anniversaries we're looking at around this meeting date. Normally we have a bit of a show and tell. I've actually got nothing to show you this time, but I'm sure other passengers may have something. Where's Lee Blackmore? He's always got a good little thing for us. Or Stuart McMartin's always lots of books to show us. So anybody got any show and tell items, please ask.
Bill, I will. I'll just point out that I was reading a biography of Andrew Fisher, an early Prime Minister of Australia, and I came across. He was coming back from South Africa after seeing the Constitution of South Africa and the formation of the South African state and he was on a ship back to Australia, and it says that it's a biography by Peter Bastian, and it said at page 205 that so this is 19 it's 1910, and there's a fancy dress on the ship, and the person who wins, who's giving out the prizes, is the author Arthur Conan Doyle. And I said to Bill, I said, I'm not aware of this happening, and him being there, I know that as Bill just mentioned, in 1920 or so, with the spiritualist tour. But Bill said he has no recollection, and he thoroughly showed where Conan Doyle was at that time. So that's obviously must be an error in that book, or maybe Conan Doyle was here.
Australia, maybe we don't know about. What year again was that, Stuart?
Beg pardon?
What year again was that?
It was 19. It was at the very end of 1910, early 1911. Yeah.
I think all the chronologies of Arthur Conan Doyle's life, he was elsewhere at that time. So I think the reporter on that ship may have thrown in a name just to spice it up.
Yeah, who happened to be one of the first secretaries of the Prime Minister's Department.
Right. makes a good story. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the politician, he wouldn't tell an untruth.
No.
I've got a book that I received recently, which I ordered from the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. It's can you see it there?
Do that.
And it's celebrating the Society's 70th anniversary. And I'll do a review of it for the log, but you can see it's, if I just sort of flick it, it's beautifully illustrated, and it goes through all of the adventures, all of the meetings of the significant happenings, and has quite a really long and thorough and very interesting article on how the society was formed, and after the exhibition in London in the 1950s. And but it's just it's a really if you're a member of the London Society, it's a good time, and even if you aren't, it's a good read.
Excellent. How about you, Lee? You've always got some new books or videos or something to show us? Anything on your bookshelf this time?
Yeah, I've got a few. I've been acquiring a few old ones. This one's an anthology called The New Sherlock Holmes Adventures, edited by Mike Ashley. It's not so new, it came out in 1997. Now, sorry, I'm fading in and out a bit because I've got a background going and you tend to sort of ghost a bit. Quite a lot. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway,
superimposed.
It's a good thick anthology of pastiches for those who enjoy that sort of thing. And another one I've got, this is a bit marginal, but it's called Detection by Gaslight, 14 Victorian Detective Stories, edited by Douglas Green, and that's in Dover paperbacks. It's quite a good one. And I got this other one which is pretty new actually, called Supernatural Sherlocks, and that's, as per the title, it's a bit of detection but with a bit of supernatural thrown in. So, you know, Sherlock running into a few other occult detectives like William Hope Hodgson's Thomas Carnegie, the Ghost Finder. That's the sort of thing I enjoy. So
who's the editor of that book? Who's the editor?
It's edited by a guy called Nick Renison.
Yes.
And published by No Exit in the UK. Yeah.
And what story does the picture come from behind you?
Good question. I just grabbed that because it was a Holmesian background, and I had something else up there before. My brother actually showed me how to put a background up there, so if anyone's interested, you don't have to have a green screen. You can do it easily in Zoom.
Yeah.
I can tell you how to do that.
The only problem sometimes is it uses up bandwidth, and you tend to fade in and out sometimes.
Yes,
Yeah.
bits and pieces of your head go missing.
Yes, yes.
Speaking of supernatural, that's you, Luke.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of things as well.
Okay, please go.
So for my birthday this year, I was given a first edition. Sorry, my video's lagging a bit, so hopefully you can see this. So that is the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I'll take the jacket off so it doesn't shine. So that's an actual first edition. We know this because it's got an error on the final page where it says Miss Violent Hunter instead of Miss Violet Hunter. So that was a lovely birthday present this year. It matches a couple of other first editions that I already have. And the other one I have, this is called Literary Yarns, and it is actually crocheting literary characters, believe it or not. And one of the ones in there is a Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes, which I think you can just see there.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I haven't tried it. My crochet skills are a bit long ago, but maybe at some point I will, and bring it into an in-person meeting if I ever manage to do it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. Anybody else got anything to show us? Robert, you got to pick your finger up? Yes, please.
I do. Interestingly, I have a copy of that first edition, the 1885 edition, and it also has a misprint in it. I think maybe he did that to define his the different editions. Mine was on page 133 where cocaine was misspelled. But by way of introduction, I'm an old geezer, and I've been a Sherlockian since in the 60s, and I'm in Chicago, and I had the privilege of on several occasions meeting Vincent Sterrett, and not only did I meet him, but a bunch of giants in the Sherlockian world. Unfortunately, I was busy with other things, and I did not realize in whose company I was. But one of my treasures and my only claim to fame is my certificate of membership. I'll try to put it up here. We're not working because I see it as a reflection.
Yeah,
Certificate of membership in the Hounds of the Baskervilles. I'm a member of Hugo's Companions and the Hounds, and it's signed by Vincent Sterrett.
Oh, wonderful.
Very good.
So that's my only claim to fame. Other than the fact that I've got a room full of books, which I don't know what to do with, and stuff and things. I'm sure you know what that problem is.
I think you'll fit in well with us, Robert. Yes. All right. Anybody else got any little tidbits to show us? Otherwise, we'll cut over to Keith, and he can.
Can I just ask Robert what his BSI name is?
I'm not BSI, but we do have investitures in our local
Right.
local things, and I'm Leonardo because a long story, which I won't bore you with. But my biological parents, I was adopted, were circus people. So I got Leonardo as the one circus performer in the canon.
Right.
Very good. All
Oh,
right.
and Bill, can I just say that if you're on the BSI, I haven't been to your former Zoom, so you may have mentioned it, but John Lellenberg passed away in April of this year.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
You put him in the last, put it on a obituary for him in the last log, issue log. I mentioned him, but mentioned his passing. So yes, very sad.
He was a member of Hugo's Companions and the Hounds here in Chicago.
Yeah, and since then, of course, Michael Whelan, the
Yeah.
previous
Right.
Wiggins of the BSI,
Last
passed
week.
away. He was the Wiggins who invested both myself and Roseanne into the BSI. So we've got a strong connection to him, and he was lovely man. And it's sad that he went so soon after retiring from the BSI, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Yes, great man, great gentleman.
Okay, without
Yes, indeed.
further ado, then I'll pass over to Keith Suter. Keith's going to give the book. You got I emailed out his speaking notes to you all, so if you like, you can refer to those if you want to go along. Otherwise, I'm sure Keith will be a most interesting talker. Okay, thank you, Keith. Keith, you're.
Yep, so I'm going to screen share. So hopefully people can see that. That, as Bill has said, the handout has also gone to you as well. So a great pleasure to be invited to give another talk to the Sydney passengers. So we're looking at Afghanistan, the Great Game. Why was Afghanistan so important to the British Empire? Before dealing with the British Empire, I'll just say something about a project that I was involved with almost a quarter of a century ago, which is looking at the importance of Afghanistan to colonial Australia. And the Daily Telegraph, for which I was then the writer of the historical page, took up this whole issue of letting people know about the importance of Afghanistan to colonial Australia, particularly in assisting the white settlement of this continent. So what happened is that in the 19th century, as we'll look at, the British took over the area of what is called British India that started 2 centuries earlier, originally as a trading country, and gradually British control continued across British India, which is today India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and also into Afghanistan, which is the contested territory that I'll be looking at a little later. One of the imports to Australia from that Indian Empire were camels, because it was found that camels worked extremely well in the Australian outback. And camels are in lots of pictures from the 19th century. It's just that we don't notice them. So if you look at the exploration that's gone on by white people looking at what's in the interior of Australia, they often have camels in the background. When gold was found in the goldfields of WA, it was the camels who were bringing in the water from the coast up to Kalgoorlie and elsewhere. So camels were very important for colonial Australia. In 1901, the new Australian Parliament, following the federation of this country, introduced what it called the White Australia policy, which said in effect that nobody who's not white would be allowed to come into or return to this country. Ironically, of course, Australia was a white country in a multicultural empire, and Queen Victoria was actually governing more Muslims than any other person in world history up to that time. So white Australia was introduced. This meant that the Afghans who'd gone back to India on leave, etc., seeing the family, whatever, they were then suddenly stopped from returning. Meanwhile, the camels had stayed on in this country. And then the camels were turned loose. And so Australia now has the world's largest herd of wild camels. There are no wild camels, for example, in Saudi Arabia. And we actually now export camels to the Middle East because our camels are very purebred camels. whereas the ones in the Middle East have been promiscuous, they've interbred, etc. So we produce some of the world's best camels. And camels now, in their wild state, there are 3 million of them. So almost the population of New Zealand, 3 million camels spread across about a third of the country. So it's an interesting little bit of history that we've forgotten about. And so what we were doing a quarter of a century ago was just simply letting Australians know about this Afghani dimension to Australian history. So that's colonial Australia. Let's get on to the Great Game. So this was a phrase coined by a British diplomat, Arthur Connolly, back in 1840. Remember, this is a time when Britain is consolidating its control over what was then called British India. And the phrase was then popularised by Rudyard Kipling, particularly in his best-selling novel, Kim. And it's a phrase that has been continued ever since. For example, in 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. At that time, it was the United States that was jostling with the Soviet Union for influence in Afghanistan. And of course, the Soviet Union lost, and the person who enticed the Soviet Union into Afghanistan, Zebnu Brzezinski, was never apologizing for what he did. So he actually helped fund the Islamic fundamentalists, who then ultimately became the supporters of Al-Qaeda and gave us the war on terror, which began 20 years ago this year. So the Great Game is this element of manipulating for influence in and around Afghanistan. And Afghanistan continues. That's the center of the Great Game. So as I say, the Great Game began around 1830 with the UK's attempt to create a new route into Central Asia, particularly around Bukhara. It originally initially ended after 60 odd years when there was a clear border drawn up between Russia and Afghanistan. Remember, we're talking about the roof of the world here. So you've got mountain ranges. It's very difficult to identify a clear boundary. But a border was drawn up between Russia and Afghanistan. But now, ironically, I find in my TV programs, I'm still talking about the Great Game, this time with the Taliban. And it's China who's seeking a new role in the region. When the Russians invaded in 1979, they sent in a group of geologists to find out exactly what was in Afghanistan. And the geologists found what we would now call rare earths, which are in my computer, they're in your mobile phone, etc. And so the Russian geologists said, oh, Afghanistan is going to be worth about $1 trillion to us in terms of rare earths. We now think the figure is closer to $3 trillion. So China has an interest in Afghanistan based on trying to get the rare earths, which they require for all their electronic components. So tragically, we end up with Afghanistan continuing to be the victim between these competing empires. Now it's mainly China and some of the other countries in that region. So the essence of the Great Game back in the 19th century, which was the time of Sherlock Holmes, was that we have these two expanding empires. You have the European Russia moving down from what we would now say was the northwest corner of Russia. And the Russian influence was moving south into Central Asia, and then also going east into Siberia. And as it moved east into Siberia, it collided with the decaying Chinese empire. And there's still a land which is disputed between China and Russia. Just over 30 years ago, I spent Christmas on that disputed land around Khabarovsk. It's actually possible to walk over a frozen river from Russia into China. You wouldn't want to do that, you get your head shot off, but that's the disputed territory. So there's still a remnant of that Great Game at the eastern end of Russia. But as I say, Russia was also moving south and was then beginning to collide with the British Empire, British India. And British India, which, as I've said, is today's India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, was the jewel in the crown. We hear a lot, of course, about Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, but the real jewel was British India. And because of the Indian Empire, Disraeli was able to make Queen Victoria an empress. So the ruler from Queen Victoria onwards, middle of the 19th century, through for about 100 years of Great Britain was both king and emperor, or queen and empress, if you look at any of the coins, etc. So it was India that really made the jewel in the crown. Afghanistan was important because it's a buffer state. So you've got the Russians moving south, you've got the British wanting to hold on to their territory in the south, and the strip of mountainous territory in the middle was Afghanistan, which is actually one of the oldest civilizations in that part of the world. But it's also called the graveyard of empires. Now, the Afghanis are generally very hospitable people, but they don't like invaders. So when I'm doing talkback radio, I quite often get callers who reminisce about how, as young Australians, 60 years ago, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, they got in their combi van and drove from Australia to England. They went via Afghanistan and probably smoked some of the local product there. And they found their time in Afghanistan very, very pleasant. And the Afghanis are very pleasant people. Just don't try to occupy the country. If you're just passing through, if you want to buy some of the local opium, fine. But just don't think you're going to stay there. So the territory has not been completely conquered for the last 2 millennia of history. So we go all the way back now to the time of Alexander the Great. He didn't manage to control it, and nobody else has. The British failed on 3 occasions. In the 1839, 1842, there's one very famous painting from that period where the Afghanis had allowed one soldier from that occupying force to go back to British lines. It clearly very severely wounded, but he survived. It was a very famous painting. In a sense, the forerunners of the Taliban were just simply saying, don't try to invade, we will beat you. And the British didn't learn their lesson. 40 years later, they're back in Afghanistan, still trying to conquer it, and failed. And then again, right after World War I. So it was stupid of the UK to try to do in 2001 what it failed to do in the 19th and early 20th centuries. The British should have known, and one of the ironies of covering the war on terror in Afghanistan is that I came across regiments whose previous regiments had served in Afghanistan in the 19th century or early 20th century. And here we were sending the same regiments, obviously different soldiers, back into Afghanistan again to be defeated. The United States was stupid not to learn from the UK's errors, as was the Soviet Union in 1979. These great powers don't learn. They become arrogant, but the Afghanis can always bring them down to earth. For those of you who have an interest in the recent American operation, well, involving, of course, Australians and the British as well, the Washington Post has on its website what are called the Afghanistan Papers. And I've given you there my podcast, where I did a podcast on the papers. In essence, what happened is that American politicians realized that they were losing the war in Afghanistan. No president was allowed to say that. They always had to keep lying and kicking the can down the street. But it was quite clear that the Americans were never going to win in Afghanistan. So they had a group appointed, SIGAR, Special Investigations into Afghanistan Reconstruction. It's a rather polite way of Afghanistan Reconstruction. It's actually Afghanistan defeat for the Americans, SIGAR. So SIGAR was empowered to interview everybody on Afghanistan that they wanted to. And the people who were interviewed were said, speak freely. We're not going to reveal anything that we're going to find out from you. We want this to be part of a learning operation. So speak freely. And they did, because they figured that whatever they said was never going to be made public. And then for years, the Washington Post went after the Pentagon for these Afghanistan papers, for the Seagar report. And that report is now available. It's on the free of charge on the Washington Post website. And it makes horrific reading, because the Americans who were interviewed, including the top generals, were saying, we don't know what we were trying to do there. In the very beginning, we went in to get bin Laden, but bin Laden fled within the first year. What did we spend the last 19 years doing? We don't know. Were we educating girls? Were we stopping the growing of poppies and the cultivation of opium, etc.? We never did find out. It makes horrific reading if you'd had an extra kid serving, or if you'd served yourself in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, and that applied to the British Empire, as well as most recently to the Soviet and American ones. Let me just conclude with bringing it back to Dr. Watson and Afghanistan. So I want to cover a couple of things with Watson and Afghanistan. The first point I want to make is why would he go to Afghanistan? My feeling is that Dr. Watson was an ambitious young man, and service in Afghanistan could provide him with fame and fortune. So it's a good way of paying off your debts. You can make some money there, etc. Perhaps the chance of getting some fortune. Remember, Afghanistan was very much top of mind in Britain throughout this period of when Watson was alive. That may well be, given the country's notoriety in the UK, he may have seen such service as being patriotic duty. So not there for mercenary purposes, just for fame and fortune, but because he wanted to serve the British Empire. So you've got two potential motivations. One doesn't exclude the other. However, he was badly wounded at the Battle of Maiwand in 1880. And there's an excellent article by Kerry Murphy on this in the log. So I'm not going to go over again that Battle of Maiwand. I simply draw it to your attention, which is on you can download it from the internet. So he was, Dr. Watson was there during the Second Afghan War, very badly wounded, and he was invalided home. And as he said, he'd had enough noise and excitement to last for the remainder of his life. That's before he encountered Sherlock Holmes. Given the prevailing medical conditions, he was lucky to get home safely. I was back in London a few years ago for a talk given to the Sherlock Holmes Society in London. And there was a brilliant presentation from a medical historian who was talking about the risks faced by anybody undergoing medical treatment around this time. And that article also appears in the log. So it's a report of the London meeting. And I think all of us in the audience at that event were just amazed at how lucky Watson was to get home reasonably safely, given the severe nature of his injuries. Speculating further, I'm now going to go beyond what the historian had to say at our London meeting. I think given his later reputation for being somewhat befuddled, did Dr. Watson suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder? Now, PTSD was not diagnosed in those days. In World War I, it was then later called shell shock. So it was a problem that had remained for anybody involved in conflict, and it continues to be a problem to this day. My suspicion is that perhaps Watson, who was clearly a bright fellow to start with, remember he'd got into Edinburgh, he'd done a medical degree, and yet has this reputation later on for being a bit dull. I just think he might have been suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, because after all, Maiwand was one of the worst defeats ever suffered by the British Army. So he might have gone through great trauma, which then haunted him for the rest of his life. Because bearing in mind, Watson was a far healthier person before he went to Afghanistan. And I made the point there in brackets that, alas, his post-Afghanistan fate is much like that of other military personnel in recent years. In other words, they come back physically they're still alive, but they are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. And the Americans have actually now lost more people to suicide than they've actually been lost in Afghanistan. In other words, these are people who are just so traumatized by their experience in Afghanistan. So Afghanistan was very important in Dr. Watson's life. Afghanistan was far more top of mind than it is today, especially with the withdrawal of the Allied forces. People now just want to forget about the recent defeats in both Afghanistan and Iraq. So we're taking it out of our mind, whereas the British were haunted by what happened in Afghanistan. The British were not used to losing battles, and yet they clearly could not impose their will on Afghanistan. And I find it intriguing, looking at the canon, that Holmes's opening words to Dr. Watson in their very first meeting, "How are you? You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive." So of all the ways in which Watson could have received a suntan or whatever, it was Afghanistan that immediately came into Sherlock Holmes's mind. It just shows how Afghanistan was then just so top of mind to people. And so Holmes, who always said he was never very well aware of what's going on in the rest of the world, was certainly well aware of Afghanistan as an area of British operations. I've also listed there a few other references to Afghanistan in other stories. So we have Colonel Hayter in the Reigate Squires. Remember, Hayter was providing a bit of respite care to Holmes and Watson when the incident took place there. The villain, Colonel Sebastian Moran, the second most dangerous man in London, serves in Afghanistan. And Henry Wood, a one-time soldier, had wandered through Afghanistan. We see him in the Crooked Man. So Afghanistan was really top of mind in Victorian England and the Edwardian era. Let me just conclude with a more positive speculation about how Dr. Watson gave assistance to Sherlock Holmes. I'm doing a series of articles for the log, as the captain has explained, looking at Sherlock Holmes's work particularly in intelligence work, in defending the empire. So originally in Tibet, remember Tibet was a buffer zone between British India and the Chinese Empire. More recently, I've looked at his work in today's Sudan, which tragically is the subject of a recent radio program I've had to do. Some things don't seem to change very much. Khartoum is still in the news at the moment. And then I'm also going to be doing one on Holmes in Iran and visiting the sacred sites in Saudi Arabia. Holmes, we know, was a master of disguise. So he could get into all of these places, exploiting his skill with disguises, and was carrying out intelligence work for the British government. His operation was financed by his brother Mycroft, who also kept his lodgings going at Baker Street, ready for Holmes's return after the intelligence work has been conducted. I think that in all of this traveling around through the Islamic world, Holmes would have benefited greatly from his conversations with Watson about Islamic politics in Afghanistan and his becoming acquainted with the Arab world and the Persian worlds, as well as the importance of Tibet as another buffer state. Remember, Watson had actually been on the ground in the Islamic world. He's been in Afghanistan. And I think that he would have actually provided some assistance, not knowing that Holmes was going to disappear into those areas, but just sort of talking, reminiscing about what it was like to be in British India and giving background information to what Sherlock Holmes could then later exploit when he was going to go undercover for his secret work for the British government during the Great Hiatus. So by way of summary, I've gone on for far too long. By way of summary, Afghanistan was very important at the time of Sherlock Holmes being alive. it certainly had a big impact on the life of Dr. Watson. And then finally, Dr. Watson could use his knowledge of that part of the world to, in effect, brief Sherlock Holmes on what he would encounter when he did his secret work. Neither of them knew that Holmes was going to be doing that secret work, perhaps, but nonetheless, it was useful background information for when Holmes began that work back in 1891. So Afghanistan is very important for those of us who admire Sherlock Holmes. I'll leave it at that point. Thanks, Captain.
Thank you, Keith. That was fascinating. Happy to
Well
take-
done.
I'm sure Keith will happy to take some questions.
Well
from you
done.
guys. I'll start off with a question for you, Keith. Is it safe to say that all these various invasions by these so-called superpowers over the centuries have all failed for similar reasons?
Yes, the Afghans are very good at fighting. A well-organized, well-motivated group fighting on their own terrain with the support of the local people are basically impossible to defeat. And remember, all of these superpowers were countries beginning with Great Britain, and then later the Soviet Union, and then the United States. They were all ready to fight conventional warfare. It's very difficult to win a guerrilla struggle when you're up against, as I say, people who know the local terrain, are supported by the local population. And that goes all the way back to Alexander the Great. So yes, there is this continuity that people are just so arrogant. Their belief is, we've got so much money, we've got so many chariots or tanks or helicopters, we're bound to win. But in fact, it's actually very difficult to win a guerrilla struggle using conventional means. So yes, there is this continuity, which goes back 2,000 years.
Fantastic. And we always think about Afghanistan as being ruled by warlords in various areas of the country, these clan groups or family groups controlling sections of the country. Has there ever been any sort of national consensus between them, or is it all just local agreements that they will respect each other's territory?
Yeah, Afghanistan is a pre-modern society. So we talk about pre-modern societies as ones that are based on local tribal sentiment and the importance of the family. So we are a modern society in Australia. So we have a national government, we have a central government, and we have a national sense of identity. Obviously, we argue between New South Wales. At the end of the day, we are Australian, or we are all British. Whereas the Afghanistan is a tribal community, and your loyalty is to the family and to your tribe. That's why I'm talking about the Taliban, who are Pathans or Pashtuns, and we're getting the Islamic State involved, and now they're Sunni, and they're killing the Shia, who are the Hazaras, who are in central Afghanistan. And you've got the Uzbeks in the north, you've got Persians in the west of the country. So there is, as a pre-modern society, it lacks a sense of national identity. The Americans have tried to create one, but it obviously has not taken root, because Afghanistan, unfortunately, outside of the big cities, is falling back into these tribal struggles and family struggles. And you see it throughout the whole of the Arab world as well, where the family is very important. It also, by the way, makes intelligence work very difficult, because if you send somebody into, let's say, World War II, the way that the British were able to spy on the Germans, or the way the Germans tried to spy on the British, you could send in an agent who could perhaps pretend to be a local person. Whereas when CIA or MI6 or the Israelis try to get into an Arab country or Persia, they not only talk about you, because you may well be a fluent Arab speaker, but they will want to know about your forebears. They want to know the family lineage. So from an intelligence point of view, you're not only creating a history for the individual, but also you're having to, which you can do. Jane and I last night went to see a great movie, The Man Who Never Was, Operation Mincemeat, where the British invented a history for this particular individual, and which fooled the Germans on the invasion of Sicily. So you can do it in some societies, in a modern society. In a pre-modern society, everybody is a member of a family and a tribe. And so when you try to get into a pre-modern society for intelligence gathering, you've got to be able to manufacture not only your own history and be good on the local language, but you've also got to be able to invent a family history, which you have also memorized. And clearly Holmes was able to do that for his trips around the Arab world.
Does that mean that Holmes would have had to have spoken Arabic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would need to have fitted in. Remember, he's the master of disguises. And I've got to tell you, Arabic is very hard to learn. In the old days, when I was covering a lot of Middle Eastern affairs, you actually have different strands of Arabic in the same way there are varieties of English. You've also got High Arabic, which is where the Quran is written, but you've also got the sort of more communal forms of Arabic. And so somebody from Turkey, well, they would probably want to get away from speaking Arabic, but Saudi Arabia and Morocco, for example, would have different versions of Arabic.
It's interesting that in Holmes's hiatus, he went to Khartoum, and which you discussed in the last issue of the log, and he went to Mecca and to Tibet, and presumably in Tibet he was, because the fear of Britain was that they were going to allow the Russians to have a mission there and influence them. I'm not sure what, maybe you could tell us what you think he was doing in Mecca, but it's interesting that he didn't go to Kabul. He didn't go to Afghanistan if he was doing this sort of intelligence work.
Yes, an interesting point. I don't know why he didn't do that. Bearing in mind, he would have known from Dr. Watson how dangerous it is to try to get in there.
Yeah, I guess so. Because Afghanistan, but the king of I think some years before that had actually made some sort of agreement with the Russians and had allowed a Russian mission into Afghanistan. So all sorts of alarm bells would have been going off for the British there.
Yeah. I'm just going by what's written in the text. So if he didn't go to Afghanistan, I'm not covering it. In terms of what he's going to do in Mecca, I've still got to work that out, Aaron, I'm afraid. So I'll let you know that that'll be the third article in the series in Persia and Mecca and Saudi Arabia, that is. Yeah.
Fascinating. All right, anybody else got more questions?
It could, I guess in the modern context, Keith, considering the tribalism of the Afghanis, I mean, the Taliban has the press has been reporting that the Taliban, they're not going to be as barbaric as they were the previous time. They're going to try to modernize but I mean, is it realistic that they can rule a country that has so many factions in it, or is that a Western concept that they could even think of doing that?
Well, the Taliban are based in the south. They're Pashtuns. They're going to have difficulty controlling the country, particularly in the northern area where you've got the Uzbeks. So, and the Russians are very nervous, and the Chinese are nervous because the Chinese, remember, have got an Islamic western end to their country in Xinjiang. So they're worried about Islamic fundamentalism going over the border and going into Western China. So, yeah, the Taliban have difficulty. We know they're having difficulty governing because you've got so many different factions, even within the Taliban. They're not a unified group. So Afghanistan will remain fairly chaotic. But from an American point of view, it won't be on the front pages. And from my point of view, I'm not going to be reporting on Afghanistan because I think it's just going to disappear from our worldview, even while it's going to be more and more significant for, say, the Chinese and the Russians.
So you think we're going to let it go at last?
Yeah, I think we'll leave Afghanistan alone for a while. Let the Chinese get bogged down. It's their turn now.
Well, thanks very much, Keith. That was fantastic. You certainly made stuff, as we all know. That's probably the end of our presentation for today, folks. We could just have a quick question amongst ourselves if we like, a bit of a chat. But have to be a big thank you to Keith and to Doug Elliott, who's doing the recording and editing for our YouTube channel. just on our future meeting plans, we're probably going to return to face-to-face meetings, in-person lunch meetings early in the new year. Perhaps March could be our first one, but in the meantime, we may have one more Zoom meeting in between then and now, because I've had an offer of another overseas speaker who wants to address our group. So I'll certainly try and line them up for maybe early in the new year as well. Should be good. But we'll certainly keep you informed of what the plans are for our meetings. Paul Jenkins, you want to have a talk about the Dungog weekend?
Have we got enough time left, Bill?
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
Oh, great. Okay. Oh, well, thank you for your time. Fantastic talk, Keith. I wanted to move from that amazing past history to potential future adventure that my brother-in-law is on here as well, Simon Smith, who lives in Dungog.
Hi, Simon.
G'day.
He's a recent member. So what we're proposing, and Simon's done a lot of the legwork already, is a potential Sherlock Holmes weekend in Dungog on the long weekend next year, 13th of July. And this would involve, and I'll let Simon expand on a few ideas that he and I have had, but basically would involve perhaps 1 or 2 nights stay in the town. There's certainly suitable accommodation, but involving several films scattered over a time frame, perhaps from right back up to more recent Cumberbatch or something. A dinner, perhaps in costume, a talk with possibly a problem to solve, and perhaps some other activities, reminiscent of some of the things that you've done in the past, where we've gathered together. I haven't been to the recent ones, but I certainly remember the one in the Blue Mountains, probably 15 years ago or so, 15, 20 years ago.
Longer than that.
Longer than that. Yeah. So look, Simon and I have been working on it for now, I don't know, a month or two, and because Simon's on site in Dungog, it's a great little town. It previously ran the Dungog Film Festival, which unfortunately got sort of cannibalised and sent to Sydney, so it is right for something like this. But I wonder if I might let Simon sort of outline some of the ideas we had, just briefly, because what we're asking for is there a vote of confidence for us to progress in this? And if there isn't, then that's fine. If there is, then the most important thing would be to get sufficient numbers to make it worthwhile for the. But anyway, I'll pass over to Simon.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, thanks, Paul. And thank you, Keith. That was brilliant this afternoon. Very much enjoy what you do, mate. Lovely. Good on you. Thank you. Look, yeah, as Paul mentioned, and at this stage, look, it's really an idea, but we're fortunate in Dungog, being in the heart of Valley. We're only 2.5 hours out of Sydney. We've got a rail line, which is great. But one of the great things about Dungog is we've got one of the nation's oldest running picture theatres here, the James Theatre, and it's a fabulous old theatre. It's got a local group that look after it, and they do a lot of terrific work. And they're always looking for opportunities to, work with different groups and whatever. And so the idea is, as Paul mentioned, and it's his idea. It would be basically a weekend revolving around obviously Sherlock Holmes movies. We've got some wonderful accommodation now in Dungog. And so hence, it maybe feature a dinner, a trivia night, and also obviously a guest speaker. But again, it's one of those things that would bring a lot of people together. It would be great for the town. As Paul mentioned, we had the Dungog Film Festival here quite a while ago, and that was a raging success. And to all intents and purposes, it got hijacked, which is fine. But Dungog again is now looking for something to do in the future to utilise the picture theatre. But again, a group like the Sherlock Holmes Society, not only in Australia with what you do with the passengers, but it's got an enormous following, and it's just one of those things that I reckon it'd be a great weekend if we could put it together. But all we're basically wanting at the moment is just an idea of whether or not you think it's worthwhile pursuing. Yeah.
What sort of numbers do you think you'd need to make it viable?
Well, I'm talking to Howard Glenn, who he and his partner have taken over the Royal Hotel here, and they've done a magnificent job. And Howard is again very interested in it, only from the point of view that they've got lovely accommodation there now and a terrific facility. They in fact had the Australian Chamber Orchestra here not that long ago for a performance at the James, which is great. But Howard would reckon, particularly again with the James Theatre, it could seat 400 or 500, but to make it work, I guess the first time around, we'd probably at least need 200 to make the thing move. Yeah.
I guess it's a matter of how you could, because between the societies in Australia, I mean, Bill could probably comment, and others who've been involved in putting some of the previous events together. I don't think we'd get 200 just from the societies in Australia. But if you were looking to open it up to like all and sundry to come and join in with the societies spearheading the event, that might be more feasible to get those sorts of numbers.
Yeah. Looking for, Rosa, is the nidus would be the Sydney passengers, and
sorry,
the nidus the nidus would be the Sydney passengers, but the funds would hopefully come from the locals and Newcastle, etc., who would come and be willing to see a few movies and obviously pay, and some people to stay overnight as well, and that might be sufficient to generate it. But perhaps Simon's got a comment.
Yeah,
so it sounds like the sort of thing like where people go and dress up as Elvis Presley, and you get.
Yes.
I mean, it's a big thing, and they all go to parks. Is it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
But there's a big machine behind, publicising it, and you probably need something like that with publicity machine if it was something you wanted to open up. Like anyone who loves Sherlock Holmes, put on a fancy dress and come to Dungog, and there'll be some events, because you wouldn't generate those numbers simply from the Australian societies. Bill, would you think that?
Yes, we did a census a few years ago, and there are societies in often Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth, and I think we come up with a figure of about 250 people in all across Australia belonging to those societies. We've tried in the past to have national events and various degrees of success and mostly failure. It's very hard to get people from Perth to travel to Sydney or vice versa for a Sherlockian event. Melbourne to Sydney is not too bad. Adelaide to Sydney looks pretty much the same. But I think if you can certainly put something together like a draft program, send it out to all these societies and see what the interest would be, see what numbers are interested from the Sydney group, and then perhaps step back and evaluate that and take it from there.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have an offline discussion about it, because Bill and I have been involved in organising events before. Yeah. And we've had, like the early days, the Blue Mountains one was a very successful one. And we've had some successful ones, but albeit we've got COVID to contend with probably for the still for a little while. But it might be worthwhile if we, if Bill and I and you guys have an offline chat just about some of the logistics of it and what you think you might be needing to charge people and stuff like that, and see how feasible it is.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's only again from the point of view that we've got a theatre here. The location's reasonably good, and being at that time of the year, you could have a lovely dinner and plenty of open fires and good healthy discussion, but it'd be just one of those weekends, I think it'd.
Yeah, and I hear you've got some good wines in that area.
Oh yes, no trouble with that.
I think the other advantage, Simon, is you're playing down. You do have access personally to broadcasting I don't know whether you want to just briefly outline what you run. That might, I don't know whether that's feasible to
Oh yeah, look, yeah. Thanks. Well, yeah, my background's broadcasting along the way, but now, and Keith would know better than anybody. Today's technology, you can do anything from anywhere, and ideally now we run a national radio thing for the trucking industry across Australia. Blokes driving trucks love something to listen to on the radio, and yeah, that's what we do. So, but it's only from the point of view that being able to promote the thing, that is in essence, that's the big thing. The disappointing thing about the Dungog Film Festival was that that worked. They had a lot of publicity and they got a lot of national coverage, and was just unfortunate. But again, it's just one of those things. The community is looking for an avenue, and something like this again is something that, but as you say, if there's a you know, something that we could develop and have a chat about, that'd be great. That's all we ask. Yeah.
Absolutely. And getting a publicity machine, if you've got some ins there, that's good, because it's about
right. It's
getting
a big
the
thing.
word out.
Yeah. And that's the unfortunate thing about the film festival, because they have wonderful coverage, you know, in the Australian and even, you know, on television and whatever else. And it just takes a long time to build something up, and to lose the name was a shame. But anyway, that's where it's at. So thanks, Paul. Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Well, Keith can tell his Channel 7 viewers, but maybe he doesn't come out as a Sherlockian on Channel 7.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. Thank you.
He
No, that's
seems
great.
a respected social political commentator.
I think it's worthwhile exploring in a bit more detail. So perhaps Simon and Paul, if you could come up with some sort of document, like a draft program for a weekend.
Yeah.
Some ideas you might have of some of the activities, the events that could take place.
We could do that. Yeah.
We could send that around to people, get some expressions of interest.
Yeah.
And see what the what sort of numbers of people who like the idea.
Yep. That'd be the plan. I think that'd be the thing. If we, as I was saying to Paul the other day, and I'm sure he's mentioned to you, Bill, yes, it's the numbers issue. If the numbers are there initially, then it's something that we could develop. Yeah. So thank you.
Okay.
That's great.
The last big weekend of the Sydney Passengers Ram was our Excellent Voyage weekend in Roseanne, 2005. Is that long ago?
Yes, it was a little while ago.
It was the 20th.
That was it was our 20th anniversary. So yeah,
Passengers. So
2005.
2005. It was our last big weekend event. So we're a bit rusty from that point of view, but and that weekend we got about 20 people, 25 people from the Sydney group to get together.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple of interstate people, but mainly from Sydney. So even though that was advertised around the country, I think there's only 2 or 3 people who came from interstate for that one. So it's hard to get people to come.
But if this was promoted as an open event, if this was promoted as an open event for people who love Sherlock Holmes, as opposed to like an in-house event for members, then I think you might attract a lot more people.
Yeah,
certainly, yes.
Okay, no, that's great. That's all we ask. Anyway, we'll talk about it and see where it lands. That's great.
I'll be in touch with both of you, Simon and Paul, just to carry forward what their plans are, and when we get something concrete like a draft plan or a draft list of events that could possibly be held, we'll send it out to everybody and get some feedback.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, Bill. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
you. Lee, you got it's a smiley face you put up there, Lee. I thought you put your hand up, but that's good. Okay, anybody else with anything they want to raise and discuss amongst the group? Because
I just want to ask Erin when you're going to have copy ready for the log, because I need to schedule my.
I should be able to start sending you through things sometime middle of this week. I've got the week off work, so I've got stuff that's almost ready to go now. So sometime this week.
Fine, great, no pressure.
Good on you.
All right, unless there's anything else, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. It's great to see all your faces on screen and from around the world. Hopefully we'll be able to get together face-to-face in person in the first quarter of next year. But I'll certainly keep you in touch with our plans for future meetings or Zoom presentations. And I'll say goodbye to you all. Thank you.
Good on you.
Bye,
Thank you.
Bill.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Merry,
Bye.
Merry Christmas,
Thanks, Ed.
everybody.
Yes,
Merry
Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
See you all next time.
Yeah, thanks.